Americanism overlaps with the concept of civil religion. Civil religion in America can be defined by written stories that create a moral structure through national policies. In 1776, allegiance to Americanism was solidified by the political notion of independence. This crucial belief of independence sets the precedence for the moral authority of America. The moral authority in developing America created fundamental principles that organized notions of civilization based off breeding. In each generation, babies are condemned to American beliefs and ritualistic symbols. Our belief system is supported by our sacred American principles, which are written in the Constitution of America and the Declaration of Independence. Ritualistic symbols for Americanism can be displayed by referencing paternalism through arbitrary notions of God and romanticized narratives of founding fathers. Paternalistic tendencies are sacred in Americanism due to the indoctrination of babies. The indoctrination of babies in Americanism is successful due to labeling. Labels are a widely used marketing technique that secures commitments to specific products. In the context of Americanism, as a product, labels are essential for social identification, holidays, education, and occupation. Native American, Independence Day, higher education, and soldier constitutes as labels that display allegiance to Americanism. As a result, babies are exposed to these norms, which become essential to their identity. Identification with dignity in America is not easily obtained. Historically, control, racial, and economic tensions provided a foundation for identities in America. On this hierarchy of racial identification, white males were the most dignified and black females were the least. However, economically, poverty was a phenomenon that had multiple dimensions of identification. Still, obvious inequalities based off identification were not a threat to the fundamental principles of Americanism. Absolute morality is an American principle that can be described as manifest destiny. According to American beliefs, the highest moral authority aside from man is God. With that being said, Americanism must have policies that are directly linked to godlike principles. For credibility, America has a Supreme Court, which is the highest form of law. The Supreme Court justice is a representative of the highest moral authorities, which gives them absolute morality to interpret the highest law in America. This allows America to have absolute control over national morals. In the context of babies, the American dream is used as a pedagogical tool for national compliance. Developing America prospered with this notion of a prophetic dream to expand westward. During the Civil Rights era, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used this notion of a prophetic dream to translate African grievances in a comprehensible language to European America. Concurrently, the American dream was used to reaffirm the authority of manifest destiny. The authority of Americanism provided individuals with absolute control over notions of property. American property ranged from the fertility of the land to the body of the slave. Explicitly, America thrives due to profiteering from stolen land and stolen labor. However, Americanism ultimately believes that its moral authority was granted by God. Essentially, this God has an inconceivable amount of faith in Americanism. Naturally, allegiance to Americanism disregards the spirituality of native cultures. Prior to the development of Americanism, native cultures had their own law of the land. After their decimation, their spirituality became subordinate to American nationalism. To put it briefly, the Native American label reaffirms the authority of American nationalism rather than reaffirming the authority of native cultures. Native allegiance to Americanism was quantifiable once they mirrored slaveholding Europeans. Europeans in America had conscious and calculated policies for survival. In the early 18th century, Europeans created scare stories to encourage divisions between red Indians and black slaves. These divide and conquer techniques consciously separated or solidify red and black populations. As a result, runaway slaves accumulated in one area and the runaway slave capturers accumulated in another. Simultaneously, Europeans provided both parties with guns and forts, thus making Americanism survive by unconsciously nurturing the authority of Europeans. The authority of Europeans in America is consciously administered by firm believers of God. God is a prominent symbol in Americanism due to his credibility. Believers of this European God supported American forms of civilization. American civilization supported European missionaries, which furthered the credibility of this developing nation. European missionary teachings were essential for educating citizens about America's allegiance to God. Nurturing the authority of Europeans is a fundamental principle in Americanism. America thrived by rooting its belief system in the moral authority of God. This God is interpreted from a European context. Essentially, Europeans have a monopoly on spirituality in America. However, Americanism is a combination of respectable cultures existing at once. Consequently, Americanism evolves by nurturing dimensions of respectability. European Americans from the South during the 19th century believed that respect was God given. This belief was reaffirmed by the idea that slavery was a divinely ordained institution. Southern European Americans would not evolve to see African slaves as respect-worthy. Simultaneously, natives were seen as too heathen to obtain respect from European Americans. Despite overt assimilation from red and black populations, Europeans are not able to accept their own myth of nurturing respectability. America is infamous for organizing their principles based off breeding. In Americanism, different colors correspond to different responsibilities. Black females were paid to deliver healthy babies for European masters. Black male slaves were paid to be domesticated laborers for their European masters. Interbreeding was a controversial religious debate which eventually favored the evolution of American respectability. Today, fundamental breeding principles are still upheld as methods of relating to one another. In the past, breeding principles were religiously followed in America. Religiously, Americans upheld the institution of slavery and the heathenly notions to perpetuate European authority. Missionaries from Europe were trustworthy sources to indoctrinate American occupants. Their allegiance to the European interpretation of God gave them absolute morality, meaning they are models for a healthy American lifestyle. The American lifestyle is more righteous than reflective. Americans unhesitantly surrender their babies to representatives of credibility. Regardless of America's history of modifying principles, pseudoscience, presidential scandals, and righteous genocide and slavery, Americanism still embodies respectability. This culture of selective vision is key to the success of Americanism. Since America has always had fertility, it can mass murder relentlessly. Quickly, Americanism progresses due to ill-dignified labor. In the beginning of European settlement, labor was performed by native slaves. Then the transatlantic slave trade changed the labor force from solely native slaves to predominantly African slaves. After these groups were able to obtain their political liberties, they were never offered individual restitution for their labor. From this historical context, it is obvious that ill-dignified labor will never be granted restitution. In America, restitution translates to compromise. Babies that experience the dehumanization of their heritage by Americanism gain restitution through a written compromise. This phenomenon is prevalent in every generation due to the use of written progression rather than action-based progression. Desegregation was a compromise for America's centuries of misguidance and intolerance of non-European Americans. Even though the highest form of American law decided that segregation was unconstitutional, Americans still found loopholes to perpetuate fundamental principles of intolerance. Americanism as a religious corporation thrives off organized notions of civilization based off breeding. This economically driven notion of civilization goes back to the morality of the founding fathers. They encouraged the importation of slaves, the exportation of native goods, and the accumulation of European authority. Americanism provides Americans with God given rights to support or suppress breeding. Economically, Americanism is furthered by supporting European organizations. Natives and Americanism are common test subjects for the medical industry in European America. Most populations would assume that the United Indian Health Services were organized for the improvement of Native communities. Instead, IHS sterilized Native women to further support the breeding principles in Americanism. Like most medical scandals, compensation is European based, which can only be settled with money. Americanism, in relation to natives, has always mirrored fundamental principles of intolerance. Babies in Americanism are blank slates. They have no context for the moral structure that their guardians encourage. Their tolerance or intolerance for others are solely the product of beliefs that are nationalized. Americans use written stories and prophetic symbols to ground themselves in Americanisms. Parents were once babies that were indoctrinated, and grandparents were once babies who later indoctrinated their babies to have an allegiance to Americanism. Civilization in America is religiously believed due to sacred written stories.